I stood in the auction gallery staring at Lot 47, the Herter brothers cabinet, estimated at $800. 30 years of restoration work reduced to catalog numbers. The gallery smelled like furniture polish and champagne. Winter light cut across the Persian rugs in long rectangles. Angela and Judith from the Historical Society stood near the Chippendale chairs. Champagne flutes paused mid-sip. Preston held champagne near the Herter brothers cabinet, smiling at potential buyers. Vanessa's voice cut through the gallery, loud enough to stop conversations 3 rooms away. "You're losing your mind." She threw the keyring at my chest. I caught it. The brass fob pressed cold against my palm. My thumb found the seam automatically, the way I'd taught myself to read furniture joints in the dark. Too heavy for decoration. Wrong density. Our eyes met. 1 second. Her hand twisted her wedding ring, the tell from when she was 7, and lying to protect me from Dad's anger. Then she was gone. Preston raised his champagne glass toward a potential buyer, smiling like he'd just proven a point. Quick pause in the story. Tap subscribe, and let's dive back in. 8 months. That's how long since Caroline's funeral when I stood in this same workshop, running my thumb along the same tiger oak wainscoting. Caroline and I had spent 3 months revealing the grain. The wood grain still showed the pencil marks where Caroline had traced the cathedral patterns, asking whether quarter-sawn lumber expanded differently than plain sawn. My hand plane sat on the workbench where I'd left it that morning, next to a rosewood music cabinet someone's grandson wanted restored. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Classical music played from the radio Caroline had given me 15 years ago. The carriage house smelled like linseed oil and walnut dust. The oil had that raw, nutty scent that caught in the back of my throat. Familiar, grounding. I met her 32 years ago when her grandmother died and left her an Eastlake dining set. She hired me to restore it. 6 chairs with broken spindles, a table with water damage that had turned the mahogany white in places. She showed up at my workshop every Saturday for 3 months, asking questions about wood movement and finish chemistry. Most clients dropped pieces off and disappeared. Caroline wanted to understand the process. We married 6 months after I delivered the finished set. The Victorian on Sycamore Street came later, after we'd saved enough for a down payment. Built in 1890, neglected for decades. 7 layers of paint, 30 years of damage. Previous owners had painted over the original woodwork, covered the floors with vinyl, replaced gas fixtures with cheap electric. Caroline saw past all of it. She pulled property records, found photographs from 1910 showing the house in its original state, tracked down the architect's drawings at the Historical Society. I handled the physical work. She handled the research. Parlor took 2 years. We stripped 7 layers of paint from the wainscoting by hand because chemical strippers would have damaged the wood. Caroline documented every stage with photographs, noting which products worked and which didn't. When we found the Herter brothers cabinet at the Whitmore Estate auction, she spent 6 weeks authenticating it. Original maker's mark. Hand-cut dovetails, gilt incising characteristic of their 1875 to 1885 period. We paid $12,000. Her journal entry from March 2018 included the auction receipt, provenance research, and the appraisal certificate from Malcolm Hendricks, the appraiser Caroline always trusted, valuing it at $45,000. The dining room's bird's-eye maple paneling came from a demolished mansion in Philadelphia. I drove 8 hours to examine it before purchasing. Spent 3 months hand-stripping the old varnish, revealing the natural figure. Caroline photographed the process, made notes about grain patterns, researched the original mill that had cut the lumber in 1887. Every room had a story she'd documented. The turret library's built-in bookcases with their original glass doors. The master bedroom's pocket doors with brass hardware I'd spent months polishing. The kitchen's soapstone sink we'd found at an architectural salvage yard in Vermont. Her leather-bound journals filled the shelf near my reading chair. 12 volumes spanning 30 years. Purchase dates, prices paid, restoration techniques, professional appraisals. Volume 3, page 47, Eastlake Settee, purchased April 2016, $2,400. Horsehair stuffing, sourced from Asheville, traditional textiles after 6 months of dead-end leads. Appraised value, $8,500. She'd cross-referenced everything, created an index, photographed every significant piece from multiple angles. I pulled volume 8 from the shelf, her handwriting neat and precise. The Eastlake Settee entry from 2016 detailed my 6-month search for period-appropriate horsehair stuffing. She'd noted every supplier contact, every failed lead, the final source in North Carolina that still used traditional methods. Appraised value, $8,500. Preston sold the settee 3 months ago. I came home from the hardware store and found the empty space where it had sat for 8 years. My reputation in the furniture restoration community took 40 years to build. Estate attorneys called when they needed appraisals for probate. Museum curators requested authentication for potential acquisitions. Private collectors waited 6 months for my restoration work because they wanted it done right. I'd turned down corporate positions. Furniture design companies offered salaries over $120,000 annually, benefits packages, retirement plans. I stayed in my workshop. The corporate work meant production schedules and profit margins. I preferred the intimacy of pieces that carried histories. My quirk was the vintage tools. Estate sales and flea markets always had old hand planes, chisels, saws that previous craftsmen had used for decades. I'd buy them for a few dollars, restore them to working condition, donate them to trade school programs. Over 200 tools refurbished and given away. "You spent 6 hours on that plane," Caroline said once, watching me adjust the blade angle on a Stanley. "No. 4 I'd found at an estate sale. Mrs. Henderson's paying you $3,000 for her secretary desk. That plane's going to some kid who'll use it twice. The kid will use it right," I said. The cancer diagnosis came 18 months ago. Stage 4. The oncologist gave her 6 months. She lived 10. She didn't stop documenting. If anything, she intensified her work. The journals from her final year were the most detailed. Every piece cataloged with measurements, condition notes, estimated values. Pull dows, like she knew they'd matter after she was gone. Her last private conversation with Vanessa happened in the turret library 3 days before she died. I was downstairs making tea. When I came back up, Caroline's eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. She'd asked Vanessa to watch over me. I didn't understand what she meant then. Caroline had mentioned concerns about Preston during her illness, small comments about his financial desperation. The way he looked at the house like he was calculating square footage and property values. His jokes about us sitting on a gold mine while eating ramen weren't really jokes. He'd suggested rational estate planning, asked about appraisals, wanted to know if we'd considered the burden we were leaving Vanessa by not liquidating assets while we were alive. Caroline saw through it. She told me once, late at night, when the pain medication made her honest, that Preston resented our wasted equity. He couldn't understand why we lived modestly in a house worth over $1 million. To him, the restoration work was hoarding behavior. The furniture was inventory that should be monetized. Now, 8 months into grief, I maintained my workshop routine. Sanding, finishing, restoring. The repetitive motions connected me to 40 years of muscle memory. The smell of wood and oil and glue reminded me that I still knew how to make things right. Walking to the house meant seeing her everywhere. Parlor, where she'd spent Sunday afternoons reading auction catalogs. The dining room, where we'd hosted historical society meetings. The turret library, where she'd cataloged our life's work during her final months. I set Volume 8 back on the shelf. My hand stayed on the leather spine. Caroline's handwriting. Caroline's research. Caroline's voice asking about grain patterns. All of it still here. All of it without her. I pulled Volume 12, the last one. Her final entry was dated 2 weeks before she died. A note about the rosewood music cabinet currently on my workbench. Original finish degraded. Veneer lifting in 3 places. Estimated restoration time 40 hours. Estimated value after restoration $4,100. She'd known I'd need the work to keep me occupied. The workshop windows showed the Victorian's dark turret library. I'd left the lights off since her death. Couldn't bring myself to sit in her chair, surrounded by her books and journals and photographs. My phone sat on the workbench next to the hand plane. No messages. Vanessa hadn't called since the funeral. Preston visited occasionally, always with suggestions about downsizing or estate planning, or rational decisions about property management. I picked up the plane, felt its weight in my palm, checked the blade angle, adjusted the throat opening. The rosewood cabinet needed attention. Work I could control. Problems I could solve through patient application of skill. I remembered her voice asking questions about grain direction and finish chemistry. Her presence lived in every restored piece surrounding me. In the journals documenting our shared work, in the house we'd spent 30 years bringing back to life. I positioned the plane on the cabinet's side panel, testing the grain. The blade caught cleanly, producing a thin shaving that curled away from the wood. The rosewood smelled like pepper and roses. The familiar motion steadied my hands. Preston Ashford's suit cost more than I made in a month. I noticed that at Vanessa's birthday dinner 4 years ago when he shook my hand, 39 years old, MBA from a program he called his safety school, founder of Ashford Development Group. He talked about mixed-use properties and commercial rezoning while cutting his steak into precise squares. Vanessa smiled at him across the table. She'd met him at a real estate law conference 6 months earlier. He'd pursued her, she said, with the kind of focused attention that made her feel seen. Her corporate attorney's salary of $140,000 didn't hurt his interest. I learned later his development company was over-leveraged on 3 properties, hemorrhaging cash on projects that hadn't secured financing. The first year, Preston treated me with something approaching respect. He asked about furniture restoration techniques, toured the Victorian with what seemed like genuine appreciation, complimented Caroline's research skills. He brought expensive wine to family dinners and listened when I explained the difference between period authentic restoration and cosmetic renovation. 2 years into Preston's marriage to Vanessa, Caroline noticed the shift, small comments that felt like jokes but carried weight. "You're sitting on a gold mine here, Oliver. My clients would kill for this location." Or, "Ever think about what Vanessa will inherit? This much equity tied up in old furniture seems like a burden to leave her." Caroline mentioned it once while he worked on the dining room paneling, her voice careful. "Preston looks at this house differently than we do. He sees property values and development potential. We see history." I told her he was just talking like a developer. That's what they did, assessed everything through market metrics. She didn't argue. But her journal entries from that period started including more detailed appraisals, more thorough documentation, like she was building a record someone might need later. After the cancer diagnosis, Preston stopped joking. His comments about wasted equity became suggestions about rational estate planning. He started showing up on weekday afternoons when I was in my workshop, walking through the house with his phone out, photographing rooms from multiple angles. When I asked what he was doing, he said he was documenting the restoration work for insurance purposes, helping us protect our investment. Caroline was too sick to notice. I was too focused on her care to question his motives. In the months following her funeral, Preston's visits increased. He'd call first, asking if I needed anything from the store, if I wanted company for dinner. Then he'd tour the rooms, examining pieces he'd photographed before, asking pointed questions about provenance and appraisals. The settee, the one with the horsehair stuffing you spent forever sourcing. What did Caroline's journal say it was worth? I told him $8,500. Malcolm Hendricks had appraised it in 2016. Preston nodded, made a note on his phone. Good to know, for estate planning purposes. Then, 3 months ago, 5 months after we buried Caroline, I came home from the hardware store and found empty space where the Eastlake settee had sat for 20 years. The dust outline on the hardwood floor showed exactly where it had been. 20 years in one spot, and now just clean wood where the legs had stood. I called Vanessa. She said Preston had mentioned the settee needed professional cleaning, that he'd arranged to have it picked up. She sounded distracted, rushing between meetings. When I called Preston, his voice carried patient concern. Dad, we talked about this last week. You authorized moving it to climate-controlled storage. The house temperature fluctuations were damaging the horsehair stuffing. You signed the paperwork. I had no memory of that conversation. None. You're forgetting things, Preston said. Vanessa and I have been worried about these episodes. Dr. Huang mentioned concerns about your cognitive function during your last checkup. Dr. Huang had said no such thing, but Preston's voice was so confident, so detailed with specifics, that I questioned my own certainty. Judith Ramos knocked on my door 2 days later. She didn't wait for me to invite her in. She'd seen the settee loaded into a moving truck at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. Preston had supervised while 2 men carried it down the porch steps. I'd been asleep upstairs. I almost called the police, Judith said, but then I saw Preston and figured you knew about it. Except now you're asking questions, which tells me you didn't. I pulled Caroline's journals that night. Volume 8, page 63. The Eastlake settee entry detailed every stage of restoration. 6 months searching for authentic horsehair stuffing. Correspondence with 12 suppliers. The final source in North Carolina that still used traditional methods. Photographs showing the settee before and after restoration. Malcolm Hendricks' appraisal certificate dated April 2017, valuing the piece at $8,500. The settee existed. My memory of its restoration was accurate. Preston had lied. The Victorian Hall tree disappeared next. $3,200 appraised value, documented in Volume 9. When I confronted Preston, he produced a consignment agreement with my signature authorizing sale through a dealer he knew. The signature looked close enough to mine that I couldn't prove it was forged. You're having memory issues, Preston said. We discussed this. The hall tree was taking up space you weren't using. The dealer gave us a fair price. The money's in your account. I checked my account. $2,400 had been deposited 3 weeks earlier, $800 less than the appraised value. When I mentioned the discrepancy, Preston explained that appraisals were retail estimates, that wholesale prices were always lower, that I'd understood this when we discussed the sale. I had no memory of discussing anything. The Chippendale dining chairs vanished 2 weeks later. Set of six $6,800 appraised value. Preston claimed we'd talked about it last week, that I'd signed authorization, that the buyer had paid cash. $4,200 appeared in my account, $2,600 less than appraisal. The rosewood music cabinet I'd been restoring went missing from my workshop. $4,100 estimated value after restoration. Preston said I'd agreed to sell it unrestored to save time, that the buyer understood it needed work, that $2,800 was fair for an unfinished piece. Preston always had explanations. Signed papers, deposited funds, references to conversations I couldn't remember having. Each time, I questioned myself more. The grief made everything fuzzy. Days blurred together. I'd find myself standing in rooms with no memory of why I'd entered. Simple tasks required lists and reminders. Maybe Preston was right. Maybe I was forgetting conversations. Maybe the cognitive decline Dr. Huang supposedly mentioned was real. I opened Caroline's journal to the settee entry. Appraised value, $8,500. I checked my bank statement. Deposit, $2,400. The hall tree, appraised, $3,200. Deposited, $2,400. The pattern emerged with mathematical precision. Eastlake settee, appraised $8,500, sold for $2,400. Difference, $6,100. Victorian hall tree, appraised $3,200, sold for $2,400. Difference, $800. Chippendale chairs, appraised $6,800, sold for $4,200. Difference, $2,600. Rosewood music cabinet, appraised $4,100, sold for $2,800. Difference, $1,300. I started adding the discrepancies. Settee, $6,100. Hall tree, $800. The numbers climbed as I turned pages. Caroline's journals documented every piece with photographs, purchase receipts, professional appraisals, provenance research. Irrefutable evidence that the pieces existed, that their values were certified by recognized experts, that Preston's wholesale prices were systematically below market. I pulled more journals, found more missing pieces I hadn't noticed yet. A Victorian plant stand, a set of oak wall sconces, a mahogany side table, all documented, all appraised, all gone. Preston's gaslighting had worked because I was vulnerable. The grief made me doubt my memory. The isolation made me trust his concern. The technical details of sales and appraisals and market values confused me enough that I accepted his explanations. But Caroline's journals didn't lie. The photographs showed pieces that existed. The appraisal certified their values. The dates proved I hadn't imagined 30 years of work. I sat in my workshop at 2 a.m., journals spread across the workbench, sticky notes marking every discrepancy. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The house was silent around me. Linseed oil and walnut dust, the familiar workshop smells, but they didn't ground me tonight. My phone showed 3 a.m. I closed the journals, stacked them carefully on the shelf. The rosewood music cabinet sat on my workbench, half restored, the piece Preston claimed I'd sold unfinished. Except it was still here, which meant Preston had lied about that sale too, pocketed the $2,800, and planned to remove the cabinet later. I ran my thumb along the cabinet's veneer, feeling the lifted sections that needed attention. The rosewood was smooth under my calloused fingers, the grain tight and even. 40 hours of restoration work ahead. Work I could control. Problems I could solve. But first, I needed to understand the full scope of what Preston had stolen. How many pieces were gone? How much money he'd taken? What other lies he'd told? Caroline's journals would show me. She documented everything. All I had to do was read. The Historical Society meeting was supposed to start at 7. I arrived at Angela Kowalski's house 10 minutes early, parking my truck behind a row of newer sedans that made mine look like what it was, a work vehicle with sawdust in the bed and paint stains on the door handles. Angela's Victorian sat 3 blocks from mine, restored with the same period detail Caroline and I had brought to our work. Gas lamp conversions lit the walkway. Original fish scale shingles covered the turret. Through the parlor windows, I could see 15 people already gathered around her dining table, home tour planning documents spread across the surface. I wiped my boots on the mat. Angela met me at the door with coffee and the apologetic smile she'd been giving me since Carolyn's funeral. "Oliver, we're so glad you could make it. Your house is always the highlight of the tour." I took the coffee. The parlor smelled like cinnamon and old wood. Historical Society members I'd known for decades nodded greetings. Judith Ramos patted the empty chair beside her. Preston arrived 20 minutes late. I hadn't known he was coming. Angela's expression when he walked through the door suggested she hadn't either. He wore a suit that probably cost $2,000, carried a leather portfolio under one arm, and smiled at the room like he'd been invited. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, "but there's something everyone needs to know about this year's tour." Angela set down her planning notes. "Preston, this is a closed meeting for property owners participating in the tour." "I understand." Preston opened his portfolio, pulled out a document. "Unfortunately, Oliver's Victorian won't be participating this year due to pending estate liquidation." The room went silent. I stared at him across Angela's dining table, coffee cup halfway to my mouth. "What are you talking about?" Preston's voice carried concern that sounded rehearsed. "Dad, we've discussed this multiple times. The house contents are being auctioned December 23rd at Winters and Associates. The property will be listed for sale in spring. We haven't discussed anything." He produced more papers from the portfolio, walked around the table to where I sat, placed documents in front of me with the careful gentleness of someone handling a confused elderly person. The papers whispered against the table. £20 bond. Expensive. Power of attorney, signed 2 months after Caroline's passing. You were demonstrating significant cognitive decline, memory lapses, confusion about dates and conversations. We consulted with specialists who recommended supervised care and asset liquidation to fund appropriate placement. My hands shook, picking up the first page. I scanned the letterhead. State seal, notary stamps. Legal language about durable power of attorney and mental competency determinations. My signature at the bottom, except it wasn't my signature. Close, but the capital S in Stratton curved wrong. The crossbar on the T sat too high. I never signed this. Preston's mask of concern deepened. You signed it in my office. Marcus Webb notarized it. You don't remember because that's exactly why we needed the power of attorney. The cognitive decline was already affecting your daily function. I flipped through the pages. Medical justifications referencing cognitive assessments I'd never taken. Consultation notes from neurologists I'd never met. A care plan recommending assisted living placement at Meadowbrook Senior Community. This is all fabricated. Oliver. Preston's voice dropped to the patient tone you'd use with a child. I know this is difficult to accept. Early-stage dementia patients often don't recognize their own impairment. That's why Vanessa and I have been documenting everything: the forgetfulness, the confusion, the episodes where you couldn't remember conversations we'd had days earlier. 15 Historical Society members watched this unfold. Angela gripped her coffee cup. Judith's hand found my shoulder, squeezed. I looked at the notarization. Marcus Webb's signature and stamp, dated June 20th. I'd been in my workshop that entire day, restoring a walnut panel for the Hendricks estate. Had receipts from the lumberyard, time-stamped photos of the work in progress. Marcus Webb works for you. This notarization is fraudulent. Preston pulled another document from his portfolio. Auction catalog from Winters and Associates. Glossy pages showing photographs of my furniture, my 30 years of restoration work reduced to lot numbers and estimated values. The auction is scheduled for December 23rd. Leonard Winters has been very accommodating about the timeline. After the holidays, we'll begin preparing the property for sale. I've already had preliminary conversations with developers interested in the lot. The house itself, while historically interesting, isn't practical for modern living. The land value alone justifies demolition and redevelopment. You can't do this. His voice dropped, each word clipped. Don't make this ugly old man. You're a widower who can't remember what day it is. I have power of attorney. I have medical documentation. I have legal authority over your finances and property decisions. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Someone's chair scraped in the next room. He leaned closer, voice dropping so only I could hear. Who do you think they'll believe? The successful developer, the concerned son-in-law, or the old man who can't remember Tuesday? Vanessa stood in the doorway. I hadn't noticed her arrive. She wore a navy pantsuit, her expression neutral, twisting her wedding ring with her thumb. Dad, her voice was quiet. Preston's trying to help. We're all trying to help. Preston straightened, his concerned son-in-law mask sliding back into place. I've arranged a tour of Meadowbrook for next week. Beautiful facility. Private rooms, activities, professional staff who can provide the supervision you need. You'll be much safer there than alone in that big house. He placed the auction catalog on the table in front of me. I thought you might want to review the lots before the sale. Say goodbye to some pieces. I know how attached you are to the furniture. The meeting dissolved after that. Tom Henderson wouldn't meet my eyes. Margaret Chen checked her phone twice in 10 seconds. Angela walked him to the door with apologies about the disruption. Judith stayed beside me, her hand still on my shoulder. Warm, steady. I know what I saw with that settee, she whispered. Moving truck at 11 p.m. You were asleep. Preston left the auction catalog. Probably assumed I lacked the capacity to understand professional appraisals, that the technical language would confuse me into compliance. I drove home with the catalog on my passenger seat, parked in the carriage house, carried it to my workshop. The workshop smelled like linseed oil and walnut dust. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead when I flipped the switch. Caroline's journals sat on their shelf, 12 leather-bound volumes documenting 30 years of work. I pulled volume 8 first, open to the Herter brothers' cabinet entry. Caroline's handwriting, neat and clear. Purchase date, March 2018. Price paid, $12,000. Provenance, Whitmore Estate Auction, authenticated original with maker's mark and period, appropriate construction techniques. Professional appraisal by Malcolm Hendricks, April 2019, $45,000. The auction catalog listed it as Lot 47, Victorian-style cabinet, circa 1920s reproduction. estimated value $800. I pulled more journals, cross-referenced every piece in the catalog against Caroline's documentation. The Chippendale chairs appraised $6,800, estimated $1,800. The Rosewood music cabinet appraised $4,100, estimated $600. The Bird's Eye maple paneling appraised at $12,000 for the complete set, estimated $3,500. My calculator sat beside the journals. I added discrepancies. The numbers climbed with each page. 127 cataloged pieces. Total undervaluation across every lot. Preston's auction estimates $707,000. Difference $680,000. I sat in my workshop at 2 a.m., surrounded by evidence of fraud. Preston had made one mistake. He'd assumed I was too grief-fogged, too cognitively impaired, too broken to fight back. He'd left me the catalog, given me the roadmap to his own destruction. Caroline's journals didn't lie. The mathematics didn't lie. And now I had exactly 8 days before the auction to prove it. I spent 3 days in my workshop with Caroline's journals spread across every horizontal surface. Volume 8 sat open on the main workbench. Volume 12 balanced against the vise. Volume 3 propped on the finishing table. Legal pads filled with calculations covered the tool pegboard. The workshop smelled like coffee that had been reheating since 6 a.m. and the linseed oil I'd spilled reaching for Volume 9. The Herter brothers' cabinet entry from March 2018 showed Caroline's handwriting at its most careful. Purchase date, auction house, lot number, $12,000 paid. She'd photographed the maker's mark from 6 angles, the ebonized cherry showing the characteristic hand-cut dovetails. Her notes reference construction techniques specific to the Herter brothers' firm between 1875 and 1885. The gilt incising patterns matched authenticated examples from the Metropolitan Museum's collection. Malcolm Hendrick's appraisal certificate was stapled to the page. Dated April 2019, $45,000. Preston's auction catalog listed it as Lot 47. Victorian-style cabinet, circa 1920s, reproduction, estimated value $800. I picked up my calculator. $45,000 minus $800. $44,200 discrepancy on a single piece. The Bird's Eye maple paneling from the dining room. Caroline's journal showed we'd driven to Philadelphia in 2015, paid $8,000 for salvaged panels from a demolished mansion. She documented the mill marks proving 1887 origin. Professional appraisal from 2016, $12,000 for the complete set. Preston's estimate, $3,500. I wrote the numbers in the margin. Herter Brothers, cabinet, $44,200. Bird's Eye maple, $8,500. The numbers climbed with each cross-reference. My phone rang at 2 a.m. on the second day. Dr. Huang's office number. I answered. Mr. Stratton, this is Dr. Monica Huang. I apologize for the late call, but there's something you need to know. I set down my coffee cup. What is it? Preston Ashford scheduled a consultation 6 weeks ago. He wanted documentation supporting cognitive impairment for legal proceedings. He came alone, without you present. My hand tightened on the phone. What did you tell him? I refused. Then I conducted comprehensive testing without informing him. Montreal Cognitive Assessment, Mini Mental State Examination, Full Neuropsychological Battery. You scored in the 87th percentile for your age group. 3 seconds passed. 87th percentile. Your executive function, spatial reasoning, and memory are all well within normal range. The grief has affected your mood, which is expected and healthy. but there's zero clinical evidence of cognitive decline. Preston's medical justifications are complete fabrications. Will you testify to that? I've already prepared my expert witness statement. Any competency hearing would require independent psychiatric evaluation. I'm prepared to provide testimony that will demolish his claims. I thanked her and hung up. Pulled the fraudulent power of attorney documents from my workshop drawer. The medical justifications referenced cognitive assessments I'd never taken, consultations with neurologists I'd never met. All of it lies that Dr. Huang's documentation would expose. The mathematical case was building. Caroline's journals versus Preston's estimates, $680,000 undervaluation. Medical records proving fabricated incompetency claims. Each piece of evidence locked into place like dovetail joints in a drawer. My phone rang again at 9 a.m. Unknown number. Mr. Stratton, this is Raymond Kovacs. I deal in Victorian furniture. We met at an estate sale 3 years ago. I remembered him, short guy with a shop on Market Street. What can I do for you? I heard through the network that you're asking questions about pieces Preston Ashford sold. I bought an Eastlake settee from him 3 months ago, paid $2,400 cash. The settee, Caroline, had documented at $8,500 appraised value. You still have it? It's in my showroom right now, tagged at $7,500. I knew something was off when he insisted on cash-only, minimal documentation. But the piece was legitimate, so I figured he just needed quick money. I pulled Volume 8, found the settee entry. Can I see your purchase records? That's why I'm calling. I keep detailed records on every acquisition. Date, time, payment method, seller's statements. Preston specifically said, quick cash sale. No paperwork trail. I documented that because it made me uncomfortable. 3 other dealers called over the next 2 days. Victorian Hall tree sold for $2,400 when Caroline's appraisal showed $3,200. Chippendale chairs sold for $4,200 against $6,800 appraisal. Rosewood music cabinet sold unfinished for $2,800 when the completed restoration would have brought $4,100. The third call came before noon. Same pattern. Below market price, cash only, no paperwork. I added the dealer's sales to my legal pad. Total proceeds from back channel sales, $23,600. None of it appeared in any estate accounting Preston had shown me. The pattern was undeniable now. Preston wasn't just undervaluing pieces for the auction. He'd been stealing furniture for months, selling it through dealers who asked minimal questions, pocketing proceeds that should have been mine. I called Winters and Associates Thursday afternoon, asked to speak with Leonard Winters about authentication concerns regarding the Stratton estate consignment. The receptionist put me on hold. Classical music played for 5 minutes. Mr. Winters is unavailable until the pre-auction viewing on the 22nd, she said. I can take a message. Tell him I'm bringing documentation that proves the consignment is fraudulent. I hung up. He wasn't taking calls. I'd have to deliver the evidence in person. I drove back to my workshop with Caroline's journals on the passenger seat. 3 days of systematic investigation had built an ironclad case. Medical records proving competency. Dealer records documenting theft. Auction house cooperation. Eliminating Preston's liquidation timeline. Professional appraisals demonstrating fraud. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead when I returned to my workbench. I opened my laptop, created a new folder labeled Evidence, and began scanning documents. Caroline's journal entries, Dr. Huang's cognitive testing results, Raymond Kovacs' purchase records, Leonard Winters's email confirming auction postponement. Each scanned page was another nail in Preston's coffin. The mathematical precision of the fraud, the systematic nature of the theft, the fabricated medical justifications. All of it documented with the same careful attention to detail Caroline had brought to 30 years of restoration work. My phone showed 11 p.m. I saved the final scanned document, closed my laptop. The workshop was silent except for the fluorescent lights and the distant sound of traffic on Sycamore Street. Preston had made one critical mistake. He'd assumed grief made me incompetent, that my age and isolation left me vulnerable, that Caroline's death had broken something in me that couldn't be repaired. He was wrong. Grief had sharpened my focus. Isolation had given me time to work, and Caroline's journals had provided the blueprint for his destruction. I ran my thumb along Volume 8's leather spine. Her handwriting, her research, her voice asking about grain patterns and construction techniques. All of it still here. Caroline's journals weren't just memories anymore. They were evidence. The case was complete. Now I just needed to use it. December 22nd, the day before the scheduled auction. I arrived at Winters and Associates at 2:15, 15 minutes before the pre-auction viewing opened to the public. The auction house occupied a converted bank building downtown, all marble columns and brass fixtures that someone had polished until they caught the December light coming through tall windows. My truck looked wrong parked between the Mercedes and BMWs lining the street, sawdust still visible in the bed. Caroline's journals filled the leather satchel I carried. 12 volumes, 30 years of documentation. The weight felt right against my hip. Preston's voice carried through the gallery before I saw him. Champagne cork popping, laughter, the practiced charm he used with potential buyers. I pushed through the brass-handled doors into the main hall. My furniture sat on pedestals under track lighting. Lot numbers hung from brass chains. Catalog numbers reducing 30 years to inventory. The Herter brothers' cabinet occupied center position, its ebonized cherry and gilt incising reduced to catalog number 47. The bird's-eye maple paneling leaned against the far wall, tagged as Lot 63. 30 years of weekend labor, Caroline's meticulous research, our marriage documented in auction estimates that were systematically fraudulent. Preston stood near the cabinet with a champagne flute, showing a couple in expensive coats the maker's mark. His suit probably cost $3,000. Hair styled with product that caught the light. He saw me and smiled, the expression carrying ownership. This was his moment, the culmination of 6 months of systematic theft, and he was celebrating. Angela Kowalski stood near the Chippendale chairs with Judith Ramos. They'd come to witness, to support, to see how this played out. A dozen other people I recognized from the Historical Society filled the gallery. Neighbors who'd watched Caroline and me restore the Victorian for 3 decades. All of them here to watch it be sold off piece by piece. I set my satchel on a viewing table, unzipped it. The leather journals inside smelled like Caroline's turret library, like 30 years of Sunday afternoons spent cataloging our work. The brass doors opened again. Vanessa walked in. She wore a charcoal pantsuit, hair pulled back severe enough to make her face look sharp. Her entrance stopped conversations. Heels clicked against marble, loud enough to turn heads 3 rooms away. Her face was flushed. The expression was wrong, too sharp, like she'd borrowed someone else's anger. "You're losing your mind." Her voice cut through the gallery. Angela's champagne flute paused halfway to her mouth. Judith turned. Preston's smile widened. Vanessa crossed the floor in 6 strides. "You're harassing Preston." making these delusional claims about fraud. You need psychiatric intervention, not a lawyer. I stood there holding Caroline's journal, watching my daughter perform rage that looked real enough to convince everyone in the room. Her corporate attorney training turned against me, each word precise and cutting. The words hit like physical blows. Witnesses murmured. Someone's phone came out to record this. She threw the key ring at my chest. The brass fob hit hard enough to bruise. I caught it. Craftsman's reflexes, 40 years of grabbing tools before they hit the floor. The brass fob pressed against my palm. Too heavy. Wrong density for decoration. My thumb found the seam automatically, the way I'd learned to read furniture joints in darkness. Our eyes met. 1 second. Her jaw loosened. Eyes widened. Then the rage snapped back into place like a door slamming. Her hand twisted her wedding ring, the tell from when she was 7 years old and lying to protect me. Then she was gone, heels clicking toward the exit. The brass doors swung shut behind her. Preston raised his champagne glass toward a potential buyer. Sad situation. Early stage dementia. We're trying to help him, but he doesn't understand what's happening anymore. Witnesses nodded. Sympathetic murmurs filled the gallery. Angela looked at me with pity. Judith's hand found my shoulder, squeezed once. I stood there while witnesses murmured. Then my thumb found the seam on the brass fob, automatic habit overriding everything else. House keys I recognized. The decorative brass fob felt wrong in my hand. I turned it over, found the subtle seam, the USB port hidden in the design. "Excuse me," I said to no one in particular, and walked toward the restroom. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Institutional soap smell mixed with air freshener. Water dripped from a faucet in the next stall. I locked myself in the handicapped stall, pulled out my phone and the adapter I kept in my wallet for workshop documentation. Plugged in the drive. The directory structure loaded. Folders labeled financial records. Email evidence. Audio recordings. Power of attorney fraud. And readmessdad.txt. I opened the text file. Vanessa's words filled the screen. "Dad, I know what Preston's doing. Known for 3 months. Couldn't tell you because he monitors everything. Checks my phone, tracks my location. Only way to gather evidence was making him think I was completely on his side. Every awful thing I said tonight, every time I didn't defend you, it was to maintain cover while I documented everything. This drive contains 3 months of recordings." Preston admitting to the fraud, celebrating how easy it was to manipulate your grief, discussing how he'd split the auction proceeds with the dealers who bought your stolen furniture, bank records showing where the money went, emails with Marcus Webb about forging the notarization, everything you need to destroy him. "I'm so sorry for what I had to say, for how I had to look at you. Mom told me to watch over you. This is how I'm doing it. Use this evidence. End him." I closed the file, opened the audio folder, pressed play on the first recording. Preston's voice came through my phone speaker. The old man has no idea what's happening. I could tell him we discussed something yesterday, and he'd believe me. Grief makes people so fucking malleable. By the time the auction's done, I'll have clued enough to save the company, and he'll be in some assisted living facility wondering what happened. Another voice. Marcus Webb. What about Vanessa? She's on board. Understands this is about securing her future. Her father's going to die alone in that house anyway. We're just accelerating the timeline and monetizing the assets. I stopped the recording. My hands shook holding the phone. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Water dripped from a faucet in the next stall. 3 months. Vanessa had spent 3 months documenting this, maintaining her cover as complicit wife while gathering prosecutorial-grade evidence. Every awful word she'd said tonight was theater, protection, strategy. Caroline's voice echoed in memory. "Watch over your father." I pocketed the phone and walked back to the gallery. Preston stood near the Herter brothers' cabinet, champagne glass catching the light. Same position, same smile, like nothing had changed. Still showing potential buyers the maker's mark. His champagne glass caught the light. He looked relaxed, confident, like a man who'd won. I crossed the floor to where he stood. "Preston, we need to talk." Privately, his smile widened. "Dad, I don't think that's a good idea right now. You're clearly upset. Why don't we discuss this later when you've calmed down?" Leonard's office. "Now, or I start explaining to everyone here exactly how you forged power of attorney documents and systematically undervalued my estate by $680,000. The smile faltered. Just for a second. Then, the concerned son-in-law mask slid back into place. "Of course, let's go talk." Leonard Winters appeared from his office, drawn by the confrontation. "Gentlemen, perhaps we should continue this discussion somewhere more private." His office overlooked the gallery, mahogany desk, leather chairs, framed auction records on the walls. The window showed my furniture displayed below, 30 years of work tagged with fraudulent estimates. I set my satchel on Leonard's desk, unzipped it. The leather journals inside smelled like Caroline's turret library. I pulled out Volume 8, opened to the Herter brothers' entry. "This is my late wife's documentation of the Herter brothers' cabinet. Purchase date, March 2018. Whitmore Estate Auction. $12,000 paid." I turned it so Leonard could see Caroline's handwriting. "Professional appraisal by Malcolm Hendricks, the region's most respected furniture authenticator, April 2019, $45,000. Preston leaned back in his chair. "Dad, we've been through this. Appraisals are retail estimates. Auction values are different." I pulled the auction catalog from my satchel. "Your estimate lists this piece as a Victorian-style reproduction circa 1920s. $800. Leonard picked up Caroline's journal. Read the entry. Examine the photographs of maker's marks, the documented construction techniques, Malcolm Hendricks' appraisal certificate. The difference between 45,000 and 800 isn't market variation," I said. "It's fraud." I opened to the next entry. Bird's eye, maple paneling, 12,000 appraised. I slid Preston's catalog across. 3,500 estimated. Then the Chippendale chairs. 6,800 appraised. 1,800 estimated. Each entry showing Caroline's documentation, each appraisal contradicting Preston's catalog. Preston's confident smile died. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. Color drained from his face. Leonard's hands went still on the journal. His mouth opened, closed. "Mr. Ashford, these documented appraisals contradict every estimate you provided. Either you're incompetent at furniture authentication, or you deliberately undervalued this estate." "The old man's confused," Preston said. "His wife kept journals, sure, but those appraisals are outdated. Market conditions change." I opened my phone, pulled up the audio file, pressed play. Preston's voice filled the office. "The old man has no idea what's happening. I could tell him we discussed something yesterday, and he'd believe me." Leonard's face went white. Preston lunged for my phone. I stepped back. His voice kept playing. "Admitting to fraud. Celebrating manipulation. Discussing splitting Proceeds with dealers. Each word from the recording, another nail. Where did you get that? Preston's voice cracked. My daughter, 3 months of documentation. Everything you said. Everything you did. All of it recorded. Leonard stood, walked to his window, looked down at the gallery where my furniture sat tagged with fraudulent estimates. Mr. Ashford, you need to leave my office. Now. This auction is canceled. My legal counsel will be contacting you about our liability exposure for handling stolen property under fraudulent authority. Preston's mouth opened, closed. He looked at me, at Leonard, at the journal spread across the desk. You can't prove anything, he said. I held up my phone. I have 3 months of recordings, bank records, emails with Marcus Webb about the forged notarization, dealer purchase records showing you sold my furniture for cash and pocketed the proceeds. Preston stood. His chair scraped against the floor. You're a confused old man who can't remember what day it is. I'm a master furniture restorer with 40 years of expertise and documentation proving you committed fraud. I picked up Caroline's journals, and tomorrow morning I'm taking all of this to the police. I arrived at Winters and Associates at 9:45. The auction house doors were still locked, but through the tall windows I could see Preston inside the gallery. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost $4,000. His hair caught the morning light streaming through the windows. He was setting up champagne flutes on a table near the Herter brothers' cabinet, arranging them in precise rows. His phone was out. He took a photo of the gallery, the furniture displayed under track lighting, my 30 years of work reduced to auction lots. Then, another photo of himself holding a champagne bottle, smiling like he'd already won. Instagram, probably, documenting his triumph for business contacts and followers who thought he was a successful developer instead of a thief. I parked across the street, watched him through the windows. He checked his watch twice in 5 minutes, paced between the Herter brothers' cabinet and the bird's-eye maple paneling, pulled out his phone again, typed something, smiled at the screen. A black sedan pulled up at 9:45. Detective Rebecca Torres stepped from the vehicle, 38 years old, navy blazer over her badge and service weapon. 2 uniformed officers flanked her, one carrying a folder thick with documentation. Preston didn't see them yet. He was still inside arranging champagne flutes, checking his reflection in the gallery windows, adjusting his tie. I got out of my truck, crossed the street. The brass-handled doors opened at 9:47. Detective Torres held them for the uniformed officers, then followed them inside. Preston turned from the champagne table. His confident smile froze when he saw the badges. Preston Ashford. Detective Torres pulled a folded document from her blazer pocket. Yes, can I help you? His voice carried the practiced charm he used with clients, but his hand gripped the champagne bottle too tight. I'm Detective Rebecca Torres, Financial Crimes Division. You're under arrest for forgery, notary fraud, elder financial abuse, theft of property, and conspiracy to defraud. Preston's hand knocked over the champagne bottle he'd been arranging. Glass exploded across the marble floor. Champagne spread in a dark stain toward the Persian rugs. There's been a mistake. Preston's words came out too fast, too high. I have power of attorney. This is a legitimate estate liquidation. Detective Torres opened the folder. Dr. Monica Huang conducted comprehensive cognitive testing on Oliver Stratton, Montreal, cognitive assessment, mini mental state examination, neuropsychological battery. Mr. Stratton scored in the 87th percentile for his age group. The medical justifications supporting your power of attorney are fabricated. Preston's face went white. That's not possible. I have documentation. You have fraudulent documentation. Torres pulled out another paper. Marcus Webb, the notary who certified your power of attorney, is being arrested at your office right now. He's already provided a statement that the notarization occurred without Mr. Stratton present, in violation of state law. The brass doors opened again. Angela Kowalski and Judith Ramos walked in, followed by Tom Henderson and Margaret Chen, the Historical Society members who'd witnessed my humiliation 8 days ago. They stopped just inside the entrance, watching. Preston's gaze swept to the entrance. Angela Kowalski stood just inside the brass doors, Judith Ramos beside her. Tom Henderson, Margaret Chen, the witnesses from 8 days ago. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. The uniformed officer pulled handcuffs from his belt. This is ridiculous. The words echoed across the marble. 3 people near the Chippendale chairs turned to watch. I'm a legitimate businessman. Oliver Stratton is confused. He can't remember basic conversations. Ask anyone who knows him. We did. Torres nodded to me, standing near the door. Mr. Stratton provided Caroline Stratton's restoration journals documenting every piece in this auction. Professional appraisals from recognized experts. Your catalog estimates undervalue his estate by $680,000. That's not market variation. That's systematic fraud. Preston lunged toward the exit. The uniformed officer caught his arm, spun him around. Metal clicked as handcuffs closed around Preston's wrists. You can't do this to me. Preston's voice cracked. I have lawyers. I have connections. You're making a huge mistake. Torres pulled out her phone, showed Preston the screen. Your Instagram account posted a story this morning celebrating your major estate acquisition. That's consciousness of guilt, documenting your crime for social media. Preston's face went from white to red. That's not what it means. I was excited about the auction. The auction of stolen property obtained through forged documents. Torres tucked her phone away. Raymond Kovacs and 3 other antique dealers have provided statements about furniture you sold them below market value for cash only, no documentation. The Eastlake settee alone represents an $8,000 loss to Mr. Stratton's estate. Leonard Winters appeared from his office. He walked to the center of the gallery, faced the dozen people who'd arrived for the pre-auction viewing. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption. The December 23rd auction is canceled. Winters and Associates has discovered that the consignment was obtained through fraudulent power of attorney. We're cooperating fully with law enforcement. All registered bidders will receive formal notification by email within the hour. Preston's business contacts stood near the Chippendale chairs, the developers he'd invited to witness his success. They stared as the uniformed officer guided Preston toward the exit, handcuffs gleaming under the track lighting. This isn't over. Preston twisted against the handcuffs. My lawyers will destroy you. All of you. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Detective Torres followed him to the door. Your business accounts are frozen pending asset recovery proceedings. The dealers who purchased your stolen furniture are receiving stolen property charges, and your wife filed for divorce this morning. Her cooperation with our investigation provides immunity from conspiracy charges. Preston stopped walking. Vanessa, what? Vanessa Stratton Ashford spent 3 months documenting your crimes. Audio recordings of you admitting to fraud. Bank records showing where the money went. Email chains with Marcus Webb about the forged notarization. Everything we needed to build this case. The color drained from Preston's face completely. His knees buckled. The uniformed officer caught him, kept him upright. She was protecting her father. Torres stepped closer. While you were celebrating how easy it was to manipulate his grief, she was recording every word. They led him through the brass doors, past Angela and Judith and Tom and Margaret, past his business contacts who'd come to witness his triumph. His expensive suit and polished appearance looked wrong now, not markers of success, evidence of fraudulent presentation. I stood beside Judith while Detective Torres read the Miranda warning on the sidewalk outside. Preston's voice carried through the open doors, protesting, demanding lawyers, insisting this was all a misunderstanding. Bail hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Torres walked back inside, approached me near the entrance. Given the flight risk and financial resources available to him, I'll be recommending $250,000. Can he make that? Judith asked. His accounts are frozen. His business is under investigation. His investors are demanding an emergency meeting. Torres closed her folder. He'll stay in custody. Angela squeezed my shoulder. Caroline would be proud of you. I looked at the gallery. My furniture still displayed under track lighting. Lot numbers hanging from brass chains. But the auction was canceled. The fraud exposed. Preston arrested. She documented everything. My voice was steady. All I did was read her journals. Detective Torres pulled out a business card. We'll need your formal statement. And copies of Caroline's journals for evidence. I have them in my truck. Good. She pocketed the folder. Mr. Stratton, you built an airtight case. Systematic documentation, expert witnesses, financial records. This is one of the cleanest elder abuse prosecutions I've seen. Through the windows, I watched the police car pull away from the curb. Preston's face was visible in the back seat, pale and shocked. His confident smile from an hour ago completely gone. The champagne stain spread across the marble floor. Glass fragments caught the morning light. The celebration he'd planned, destroyed before it began. Judith stood beside me, her hand still on my shoulder. What happens now? Trial in a few months. Restitution orders, asset recovery. I turned from the window, and I go home to my workshop. If you're rooting for me, show it with a like and a comment. 6 months later, May 15th, I stood in my workshop on a May morning. 4 trade school students gathered around my workbench, watching me run a hand plane along a walnut panel. The wood grain caught the spring light coming through the windows. Linseed oil and fresh sawdust, the familiar workshop smells. See the cathedral pattern? I pointed to the grain with my thumb. That tells you it's quarter sawn lumber. Expands differently than plain sawn. You need to account for that when you're fitting panels. The youngest student, maybe 19, leaned closer. How do you know if it's original or replaced? I flipped the panel over, showed them the mill marks. These are hand cut. Machine mills leave different patterns. Original craftsmen used different tools. The Victorian remained mine. The property dispute resolved when Preston's fraud charges invalidated his power of attorney. Every stolen piece had been recovered and returned. The dealers had returned every stolen piece. The Eastlake settee sat in the parlor again, the Chippendale chairs in the dining room, the rosewood music cabinet in the turret library. Preston's trial was scheduled for September. Elder abuse, forgery, theft, conspiracy. The prosecutor had consolidated the charges. Restitution orders would drain whatever assets he had left after legal fees. $47,000 in documented theft, plus legal penalties that would extend the financial consequences for years. Vanessa visited weekly now. Last Tuesday, we sat in the turret library, the room Caroline had used for her research. Vanessa held one of her mother's journals, the last volume. "I found something," she said. Her voice was quiet. Mom's final entry. 2 weeks before she died. She turned the journal so I could see Caroline's handwriting. "Vanessa, watch your father. Preston sees only $signs where we saw history. Trust your instincts. Love transcends fear." She knew, Vanessa said. She trusted me to choose correctly when it mattered. The Sycamore Street Historical Society featured the Victorian in this year's Christmas Home Tour. Special recognition for 30 years of authentic restoration preserving neighborhood heritage. Judith organized a celebration dinner where neighbors who'd witnessed both my humiliation and vindication toasted my resilience. Angela presented Historical Society documentation of the house's transformation, creating permanent archive of Caroline's and my legacy. I donated Caroline's restoration journals to the Historical Society's research library. Educational resources teaching the difference between authentic restoration and surface renovation. Her meticulous documentation would serve future preservationists, her knowledge extending beyond her lifetime. The Caroline Stratton Memorial Scholarship for Trade School Furniture Restoration students was funded by Preston's restitution payments. Stolen money transformed into educational opportunity. The first recipient enrolled in September. In my workshop, I ran my thumb along the walnut panel's grain. The repetitive motion connected me to 40 years of muscle memory and the marriage that shaped my life. Caroline's voice echoed in memory. The original craftsman knew what he was doing. It's the people who came after who created the problems. I smiled. The lesson applied to more than furniture. Truth, properly documented, always revealed itself to those patient enough to look.